On August 8, 2025, the Supreme Court delivered a decision that sent shockwaves from Washington to small businesses nationwide. The air was thick with anticipation as the justices prepared to announce their ruling, and the entire country seemed to pause, waiting for news that could reshape the economic landscape. The court issued an emergency stay, abruptly halting President Trump's controversial tariff plan. Reporters scrambled to relay the breaking news, and crowds outside the courthouse erupted in a mix of relief and disbelief. The decision was swift, but its impact was immediate and far-reaching. Wall Street surged, and importers breathed a sigh of relief as the economic pressure momentarily eased. Traders celebrated on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and business owners across the country checked their phones for updates, hopeful that the worst had been averted, at least for now. For many small businesses, the stay offered a desperately needed lifeline after months of uncertainty and rising costs. Owners who had been bracing for layoffs or closures now saw a glimmer of hope. In small towns and big cities alike, the mood shifted from anxiety to cautious optimism. The court's move wasn't a final verdict, but it signaled serious judicial scrutiny of presidential power. Legal experts debated the implications, noting that the justices were willing to intervene in matters of sweeping national consequence. The decision hinted at a broader conversation about the limits of executive authority. Politically, the decision ignited fierce debate. Supporters called it judicial overreach, while opponents hailed it as a crucial check on executive authority. Across the country, people gathered in public squares and online forums, passionately arguing about the balance of power and the future of American democracy. Around the world, leaders cautiously welcomed the pause, hoping for an end to the escalating trade war. Diplomats reached out to their American counterparts, seeking clarity and reassurance, while global markets reacted with a mix of relief and uncertainty. The Supreme Court's order pressed a reset button on international trade, leaving the world to wonder what would come next. As container ships idled at ports and border crossings slowed, the decision marked a pivotal moment, one that would shape the next chapter in the ongoing struggle over tariffs, trade, and the power of the presidency. At the heart of this legal clash is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, a pivotal law that has shaped the way the United States responds to perceived threats from abroad for nearly half a century. Passed in 1977, the IEPA was designed as a precise tool, empowering the president to impose targeted sanctions against foreign adversaries, measures like freezing assets or blocking specific financial transactions. Traditionally, it functioned as a scalpel, used sparingly and with clear intent to address genuine national security threats without overreaching into broader economic policy. But in recent years, the Trump administration dramatically expanded the law's reach, wielding it more like a sledgehammer. By declaring trade deficits and even immigration flows as national emergencies, the administration justified sweeping tariffs and restrictions that affected not just adversaries, but also long-standing allies. This bold move allowed the president to bypass Congress entirely, imposing broad tariffs and fundamentally altering the original intent of the IEPA, from a narrow national security measure to a powerful tool for reshaping international trade policy. Plaintiffs in the current legal battle argue that trade deficits, no matter how large, do not meet the law's strict standard for an extraordinary threat to the nation. They claim the administration used emergency powers as a pretext for advancing a protectionist agenda, sidestepping the checks and balances that Congress is meant to provide. If this broad interpretation of presidential power is upheld, it could render Congress's constitutional authority over commerce nearly obsolete, shifting the balance of power in ways the framers never intended. Now, the Supreme Court faces a momentous decision. Will it legitimize this sweeping expansion of executive authority, or will it reaffirm the vital separation of powers that underpins American democracy? The Supreme Court faces two starkly different visions of presidential power. The administration argues the IEPA gives the president broad discretion to address threats, including economic ones, and that courts should defer to executive judgment. Plaintiffs led by businesses and states counter that only Congress can regulate trade and taxes, and that the president's actions dangerously overstep constitutional boundaries. They warned that allowing this precedent would let any president unilaterally control the economy by declaring emergencies. At stake is not just tariffs, but the very balance of power between Congress and the presidency. The trade conflict of 2025 escalated rapidly, beginning in March with a sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican goods. The move sent shockwaves through North American supply chains as businesses scrambled to adapt to the sudden increase in costs. Truck convoys at border crossings slowed, and customs officers faced mounting pressure as trade volumes fluctuated. The ripple effects were immediate, with manufacturers and retailers warning of price hikes and potential shortages. April's so-called Liberation Day tariffs expanded duties to a host of additional countries, intensifying global tensions and sparking heated debates in capitals around the world. International shipping hubs grew tense as new tariffs threatened to upend established trade routes. Diplomats rushed to negotiate exemptions, but the uncertainty only deepened, with global markets reacting nervously to every new announcement. Legal challenges mounted almost immediately. In May, the U.S. Court of International Trade ruled the tariffs illegal, citing overreach and lack of proper justification. Yet just days later, an appeals court issued a stay, keeping the tariffs in place and leaving businesses and consumers in limbo. The legal back and forth created confusion, with many unsure which rules would apply from one week to the next. By July, the pivotal case of VOS Selections v. Trump reached the federal circuit, drawing national and international attention. Protesters gathered outside courthouses while news crews broadcast live updates. The case became a symbol of the broader struggle over executive power and the future of American trade policy. In August, the administration announced a drastic 50% tariff on Indian imports, shocking global markets and sending stock prices tumbling. Indian exporters faced immediate losses, and American importers scrambled to find alternatives. The move was widely condemned by business leaders and foreign governments alike, who warned of long-term damage to international relationships. This final escalation prompted the Supreme Court to intervene, freezing all IEEPA-imposed tariffs. The justices cited the extraordinary economic impact and the urgent need for judicial review, halting the trade war's momentum and offering a glimmer of hope for resolution. The court's emergency stay brought the trade war to a sudden halt, leaving the nation and the world anxiously awaiting the next chapter. Crowds gathered outside the Supreme Court, reacting to the news with a mix of relief and uncertainty. The timeline reveals a relentless campaign to reshape trade policy, met by fierce legal resistance and public outcry. Each month brought new developments, with headlines chronicling the twists and turns of a historic confrontation. Now the nation's highest court holds the future of American trade in its hands, as the world watches and waits for a final decision that could redefine the rules of global commerce for years to come. The tariffs raised over $120 billion for the Treasury, but the real cost was paid by American families and businesses. Prices for everyday goods soared, fueling inflation and stretching household budgets. Small businesses, unable to absorb higher costs, faced layoffs and closures. A Virginia electronics maker, Microkits, was forced to cut staff as component prices skyrocketed. Farmers lost access to foreign markets due to retaliatory tariffs, compounding the pain. The uncertainty chilled investment and hiring, with ripple effects across the economy. While a few industries benefited, most Americans felt the sting of higher prices and job losses. The Supreme Court's stay offered relief, but the economic scars remain. The tariffs didn't just hurt the economy, they damaged America's global standing. Allies like Canada and Mexico felt betrayed, responding with their own tariffs and straining the USMCA pact. India, a key partner, was outraged by sudden 50% tariffs, threatening years of diplomatic progress. Around the world, nations saw the U.S. as unpredictable, accelerating efforts to form trade blocs that excluded America. The Supreme Court's stay paused the conflict, but trust was shattered. Rebuilding alliances will require more than a court ruling. It demands a new approach to global leadership. The diplomatic wounds run deep, and America's reputation as a reliable partner is at stake. The world is watching to see if the U.S. can restore its credibility. The Supreme Court's stay raises a massive question. What happens to the $120 billion already collected in tariffs? If the court rules the tariffs unlawful, the government could be forced to refund every dollar to importers. A logistical nightmare. Identifying every company, calculating refunds, and processing payments would take years and strain federal agencies. The Justice Department admits refunds would be required, but warns of immense complexity and fiscal impact. For businesses, a refund would help, but many have already suffered layoffs or taken on debt. The process will spark further legal battles and highlight the risks of enacting sweeping policies on shaky legal ground. The fate of these billions underscores the real-world consequences of unchecked executive action. Unwinding the tariffs may prove as disruptive as imposing them. The Supreme Court's final ruling will decide more than tariffs. It will define the structure of American government. At issue, does the president control trade policy, or does that power belong to Congress? The Constitution gives Congress authority over commerce and tariffs, a safeguard against executive overreach. The administration's use of the IEPA challenges this balance, claiming emergency powers to bypass Congress. Critics warn this sets a dangerous precedent, letting any president sidestep lawmakers on major economic issues. The court now acts as referee, drawing the line on executive authority. Its decision will shape the balance of power for generations. As the nation awaits the Supreme Court's verdict, America stands at a crossroads. The outcome will shape not just trade policy but the future of democracy itself. A ruling against the tariffs would restore Congress's role and signal a return to checks and balances. Upholding the tariffs would expand presidential power, making emergency declarations a tool for sweeping policy changes. The decision will define the presidency for decades and set the tone for America's global leadership. The Supreme Court's stay offers a moment to reflect, but the final ruling will set the nation's course. The future of American trade, alliances, and democracy hangs in the balance.